Question number 1, physical geography, climate, vegetation. Letter A, describe the physical geography of Western East Asia. Western East Asia, as you can see by the map in the top left corner, is very, very mountainous. This portion here is what we're talking about of Western East Asia. You have a very rugged landscape. You have deserts with the Gobi and the Taklamakan, and then the very, very rugged areas of these mountains make it very hard to live in. B, describe the climate and vegetation of Western East Asia. The climate and vegetation of Western East Asia revolves around a couple of different themes. For one, the climate, you're mainly going to have your highland zones and your steppe and your desert zones. Both of these are going to be pretty dry, unless you're on the very tops of these mountains. Your vegetation zones are going to reflect the same thing in this region. You're going to have a lot of desert scrub, a lot of desert waste, and then you're going to have the highland zones that reflect the type of vegetation you're going to see. So very little to no vegetation in the Western East Asia region. It all depends on altitude. C, describe the physical geography of Eastern East Asia. Eastern East Asia is going to have a lot of flat plains. You see the North China Plain, you see the Manchurian Plain, you see these kind of lower elevation areas. You're going to have a lot of rivers that go through this area as well, with the Yellow River, the Yangtze River, and the Ji River all coming through this area. And you've also got it close to the coast, which is good. D, describe the climate and vegetation of Eastern East Asia. Climate and vegetation of Eastern East Asia is going to be a lot more wet than Western Asia was. You're going to have some humid subtropical, some humid continental, and even some steppe zones located in there. And then that's going to reflect on the vegetation map as well, there towards the right, because you're going to have some deciduous, mixed deciduous coniferous forests, as well as some tropical forests in that southeastern portion of this area. So you're going to have a lot more farmland in the eastern area than you are the western area. There's going to be more moderate climates, and there's going to be plenty of rainfall, and you're not going to have the harsh temperature extremes. And now E, describe how this affects the population distribution based off of what we've learned in these two things. The eastern area of East Asia is going to be highly populated, while the western area, not so much. Because the land is flat, the climate is good, you're close to the coast, you can trade, you can get out, and so you're going to have a lot more people living in the eastern area, as well as these rivers are going to affect population settlement in this area, because it's the cultural hearth, if you remember that. And then finally, describe the monsoon winds in East Asia. The monsoon winds are kind of similar from South Asia in that the summer months, it brings wet rain, and in the winter months, it's cold and dry, depending on where you are, but they're kind of coming from a different direction. In East Asia, they're coming from the southeast and moving towards the northwest in the summer, which is bringing your plentiful rainfall. And then the winter, they're actually coming from the northwest and moving down into the southeast, still dry, still cold, like in South Asia, but they're kind of coming in different directions. Number 2, population. A says, describe South Korea's rise to a more developed country. South Korea, after the Korean War, has turned more towards the United States for help. They have increased industrialization. They have increased the amount of secondary jobs that are available. And this focus on industrialization has actually created a more developed country, as they're able to export more goods out and to these other countries which are around them, which has created a more developed country that they're able to grow. Letter B, describe the location of people in East Asia. Again, Eastern East Asia is the most populated area. The further west that you move, the less likely you are to see populated areas. And again, that's based off of the physical geography. Same thing further north you go, less people. You're getting too cold, and the landscape is still too rugged in these areas. So you have very sparsely populated land. And then C, describe the population numbers in East Asia. They are extremely populated. As a region, this is the most populated region. Even though you have the world's most sparsely populated country in Mongolia, this region itself is still one of the most populated regions in the world. Now moving on to number 3, history and government. A, what was the Silk Road and why was it important? The Silk Road was a 2,000-year-old trade route that has been an exchange of goods and culture in and out of this region. An example of an exchange of culture is Buddhism, because Buddhism got to this area based off of the Silk Road. Buddhism spread into this northern area from India, and then the Silk Road actually brought it into China. But it's an exchange route that at the beginning they were exchanging silk out of China and moving it towards ancient Greece, because the ancient Greeks wanted Superman silk underwear, and the only way for them to get that was to get it from the Chinese. I'm just kidding, that was a joke. They were more Batman fans anyways. But the Silk Road was a trade route as well as a route that culture moved on as well. Letter B, where are the cultural hearths in China? The cultural hearths in China are located between the Yellow River and the Yangtze River in this region there, in between those areas. Now, it says describe its location in correlation to where people are presently located. What that means is modern East Asia, most of the people live in this region anyways, and so the modern East Asian region is living on the ancient cultural hearth, meaning these people haven't moved. They're in the same region where civilization began in this region. Letter C, what type of government does North Korea have? Remember, North Korea is a totalitarian dictatorship under the supreme leader. C, or D, says, explain the Korean War and the 38th parallel. Remember, the Korean War all began around the 38th parallel. This parallel is the division between North and South Korea. North Korea invaded South Korea. The United States stepped in on behalf of South Korea, and they pushed the North Koreans back into North Korea and got right on the border. Douglas MacArthur wanted to push into China, but the president at the time said, it's not a good idea, fall back to the 38th parallel. So they fell back to the 38th parallel and ordered a ceasefire. Today, at the 38th parallel, it's referred to as a demilitarized zone, meaning it's a ceasefire. The war is not officially over, it's just a ceasefire. Now moving on to number 4, culture. A, describe the culture of Mongolia. Mongolia is a very, very traditional country. They are a nomadic peoples. They move around. They follow the herds for the most part. They've got some modern people around the city of Ulaanbaatar. But outside of that, very nomadic peoples, very traditional, moving around, living in semi-permanent homes. B says, define cultural convergence, and then how is it correlated with the Olympics? Cultural convergence is talking about when cultures come together and they start to blend, or when you start to take on ideas from another culture. And a great example of cultural convergence in this region is with the 2008 Beijing Olympics. With the 2008 Beijing Olympics, you had the blending of ancient Greek culture with the Olympics itself being mixed with Chinese culture in itself. So you had cultural convergence coming together in this region. And what's significant about that is China itself is not really open to outside cultures coming in and especially changing the culture based off of outside cultures. And so this was a very significant event when China held the 2008 Summer Olympics. And then C, describe the major religious systems. You don't really have a lot of religious systems. Then it says, why is there not a lot of religion? You have some Buddhism. Mainly you have a lot of Confucianism, Taoism, and shamanism because they're philosophies. The communist government in China and North Korea does not want there to be a power higher than the government itself, and so philosophies are supported, but outright religious systems are not allowed in these regions. China is becoming a little more lax, but for the longest time, you couldn't get into China if you openly admitted that you were a Christian, because they did not want Christianity spreading in the region like it did in other parts of the world. And then number 5, East Asia today. A says, draw and label the economic spectrum of the countries in this region. Economic spectrum, if you remember about the economic spectrum, in the middle always goes socialism. It's kind of 50-50 on big business. On the far left, you have the communism economic system or command economy. And then on the right, you have the free market. North Korea is going to go on the far, far left because they are 100% government control. They're the most extreme left nation in the world. If you'll take the instance, the movie The Interview, it's actually not that far from how life really is in North Korea. Then China is going to be just to the right of that, and they're in fact moving more and more to the right as they make more decisions like opening up the spheres of influence and creating these free market zones because they're seeing economic success. So they're a little bit further to the right of communism, and they are actually moving to the right on the economic spectrum, even though today they're located at that red mark that you see next to North Korea. And then just barely to the right of socialism, you'll see a little blue mark, and that's going to be Mongolia. Mongolia is to the right of socialism, but they're a very new democracy, and so they're more towards the communist side almost, based off of their past with the Soviet Union. And then just to the right of that in green, you have Japan. Japan is more towards the free market side than the socialism side, but they're still, based on their traditional past and the way they've come from, they still have a lot of government control in their economy, but they are also moving more and more towards the right, just like we saw with China, but they are presently located in where the green is, a little bit past socialism. And then finally in pink, pretty close to free market, you have South Korea. South Korea is all the way to the right because they have modeled what they saw with the United States. So we kind of helped them out with their economic system and helped give them the economic system they have. And because of that, they're one of the more developed countries of this region. Also because they're focusing on industrialization and manufacturing, but they're becoming more and more developed. B says, describe Hong Kong International Airport. Remember, Hong Kong, this island area, does not have a whole lot of land, and so they've developed this airport, Hong Kong International Airport, by bringing in sand to build an island so that they can put the airport on this island so they're not taking up land in their mainland area, because they don't have a whole lot of land that they can be doing this with. C, how is the development of infrastructure in China and Japan unique? Their infrastructure must support a rapidly growing population. The regions of this area of China and Japan are growing rapidly. They don't have a lot of space for the cities themselves, and so they're having to develop infrastructure that can support this rapid population and that many people. D, why is the Three Gorges Dam important? One of the main things about the Three Gorges Dam is that it allows ocean-going ships to get farther inland. So that allows imports into the region as well as exports out of the region to be able to get further out because the ships can go through the lock systems and get further into the areas and get the exports further into the mainland. And then E, what is a tsunami? A tsunami is a huge tidal wave formed by an underwater earthquake. Next question, how do they modify their land to prepare for a tsunami? In a lot of these regions, especially in Japan, you'll have cities that will have walls that they have constructed on their coasts that are pretty high to keep the modern tsunamis or the average tsunamis from reaching the cities themselves. Now, of course, if you have a major one, it's not going to matter anyways. And a good example of a major one is the Fukushima nuclear power plant. There was a tsunami that hit the city of Fukushima, and they had a nuclear power plant that created a nuclear disaster after a huge tidal wave caused leakage of radiation in 2011.